Welcome to Pete's Doc Talk TV. I am Dr. Mona Amin, a board-certified pediatrician and mom, and we're going to be talking about autism characteristics today. Before we continue, make sure you hit that subscribe button because that's how you stay up to date on all of my content on this channel, and make sure you follow me at Pete's Doc Talk on Instagram for more information. And here we go. Caregivers in my office, as well as my followers on social media, are always asking about milestones in development and if certain characteristics are signs of autism. And I really wanted to create this video to talk about some of the characteristics that I think some families are a little bit confused about and really explain what this is. So you may have heard that April is Autism Awareness Month and April 2nd is World Autism Awareness Day, designated by the World Health Organization. But many in the autistic community don't look fondly upon this month, and I'm attaching a resource about that. I'm using this month and the days surrounding World Autism Awareness Day to really do this video to spread education and acceptance for our neurodiverse community. So this is going to be what this video is about, but I really encourage you to read that article that I attached to the show notes for more information about the history of this month and this day and what it means to our autistic community. I'm also releasing 4 episodes on my podcast next week in honor of acceptance of neurodiversity. So make sure you listen to these episodes, which debut April 7th on the Pete's Doc Talk podcast. So in the United States, at the 18-month and 24-month visit, your child should get a questionnaire or screening form to screen for autism. Now, these questionnaires are not my favorite because they kind of put children into 2 boxes, yes or no. And many times with autism, it's not so cut and dry, yes or no. So I think it's really important to recognize this, which is why I created this video. But these visits are important in those toddler years to assess your child's development. Now, the diagnosis of autism can actually happen much later. In many kids, this can be above 2 years old, 3, or even 4 years old, and in many cases, even into adulthood. So that's why it's important to know the different characteristics, to know if it's something that you need to bring up to your child's clinician, and also to know, well, my clinician is going to be asking X, Y, and Z questions, so I should be prepared and monitoring these certain developmental milestones and characteristics. So why are we screening at 18 and 24 months if the diagnosis is sometimes made much later? Well, it's important to know at this time frame if there's any characteristics we're concerned about. Why? Is that if we are, the best thing is to get services and an evaluation early. I want to really reiterate that we should really be pro-intervention. So anyone that's involved in a child, whether it's a teacher, a parent, a caregiver, a loved one, a pediatrician, a clinician, it's really important that we're pro-intervention. What does this mean? It means that if we're concerned about a child, that we should get an evaluation. That evaluation can look like many different things: speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, feeding therapy, behavioral therapies. These are all specialists in these areas that can help a child reach the outcome for them. So I think it's really important to remember as you go through this video, the reason I'm going through all of these characteristics is for you to know, well, my child seems to be doing this. Maybe I should bring it up to my child's clinician because maybe we need a further evaluation. So as I go through this episode, you're going to hear me use the words neurotypical and neuroatypical. When I talk about these, it basically means that some characteristics we can see in neurotypical children, and some we can see in neuroatypical children, and some we can see in both. So this is why it's important to know the differences in these characteristics and when you should speak to your clinician. So as I said, the average age of diagnosis can be over 2 years of age. By the time a family makes that diagnosis, they can look back and say, well, maybe there were some characteristics all along that pointed me to this diagnosis of autism. So it's really important to understand that even though from the time that you start to see concerns with your child's development to the time of diagnosis, it can be quite some time. It doesn't mean that it was a delay in diagnosis. It just means that sometimes these milestones are being monitored. Sometimes these characteristics are something that we're looking for to see, well, is anything else happening? Is this something that we are waiting out? Is this something that needs an evaluation? The characteristics vary. So it's so important to remember that. And that is why the boxes of a questionnaire don't always work out so well, because you can't really fit a child's development into one box. And that is why the big picture is important, and that is why conversations with the child's clinician will be important too. So when making the diagnosis, we are looking at social interaction, language and communication, and repetitive behaviors. When making the diagnosis, we are seeing characteristics in each domains. You may not have every single characteristic, but it's important to know that if your child is having characteristics in the social, communication, or repetitive behavior categories, especially combined, that you speak to your child's clinician. In order to make that diagnosis, we see these characteristics in early childhood, and we can also see these characteristics impact other aspects of development and behavior. Sometimes it can impact feeding, sleep, behavior, etc. As I mentioned, many of the characteristics I'm going over are present in a neurotypical child, but it's when it's becoming more persistent, pervasive, that we want to make sure that we are doing an evaluation for autism or any other developmental concern. So the first category we're talking about is social interaction characteristics. So I want to talk about eye contact. So eye contact is something that we would expect in a baby by the 9 month of age, but remember, this is not always consistent eye contact. The important thing to remember here is that if your child is past the 9 month of age, 1 year, 15 month, 18 month, and the eye contact is not becoming more prominent, and we're seeing regression in that eye contact. More times than not, you feel like your child is not making eye contact. This is a reason you need to speak to your child's clinician. The next characteristic is responding to their name. Now, this is a milestone that we would expect by the 1 year mark. You say their name, they either look up, they may make a sound. This is an important milestone that we see in children. Now, if your child is not making this milestone by the 15-month mark, it's really important to speak to your child's clinician. Similar to eye contact, I would want to see that as the months go by, they are more responsive to their name, they are making more eye contact. Remember, we don't expect a toddler to always sit and stare at you for a long period of time, but you should feel as a parent that you can get your child's attention by the time they're a toddler, 15, 18 months, by calling their name or making that eye contact. The next one I'm talking about is also a confusing one, and it's called joint attention. So joint attention can be initiated one of two ways, either child-initiated or caregiver-initiated. In the child-initiated examples, it would be a child who's pointing to an item, maybe a plane in the sky, or looking out into the distance and pointing. They may also look back at you to see if you're also looking at the item they're looking at. They may use word approximations or actual words, but they're trying to get that attention. This is an important milestone that we see that shows that the child is recognizing something in their environment and trying to engage with their caregiver with that item. Caregiver-driven joint attention is you saying, look at the ball. And when you look at the ball, the child will also look at the ball. They may also verbalize and say something to say, ba, ah, ah, showing that they are engaging with you in that item as well. I attached a resource on my show notes about joint attention because I think it's important to know how you can engage your child in this milestone. And if your child is not having joint attention, bring it up to your child's clinician. Another part of the communication domain would be no pretend play. So pretend play is something that we would expect by the time the child's 18 months. What does this look like? They have a car and they'll roll it around. They have a remote or a phone and they'll pretend to turn on the TV. They'll hold a phone to their ear and pretend to talk on the phone. They'll pretend to feed a baby. These are things that we would expect by 18 months. The next domain are repetitive behaviors. So some examples of a repetitive behavior would be things like rocking, swaying, spinning, twirling fingers, hand gestures near the eyes. These are all things that if your child is doing, especially in the toddler years, in conjunction with other characteristics that we would want to know. Now, these actions are known as stimming, and stimming can be very helpful for some autistic children and adults in helping manage emotions in stressful situations. Another characteristic is echolalia. Echolalia sounds like what it is. It's echoing a sound or word. So a child is going to do that when they're learning language. You'll say something, they'll try to mimic it. They'll echo you in what you're saying. But by the time the child's 2.5 years old, we should see that diminish. We should see that they're able to initiate their own words. So if your child is doing echolalia past the 2-year mark, definitely by the 2.5-year mark, I would want you to bring that up to your child's clinician. This could be a sign that we need to have them evaluated to make sure that we don't need any services for that child. Another characteristic is playing with parts of a toy. So what does this look like? Example is your toddler has a car and they continuously spin the wheels and it's always just the wheels. They never really want to play with the actual car. Maybe you're not seeing pretend play with that car with them rolling it back and forth. Another example would be a ritualistic behavior, such as lining items up and needing to touch things in a certain order. This is an important characteristic that I'd also want you to monitor. Next is sensitivity to sounds, textures, different foods, for example. This is an important one. Children can be very sensitive to sounds and light and textures and different foods. But if you're starting to notice that everything is being affected, foods are an issue, certain items that they're wearing are an issue, they're touching sand, it's an issue, we really want you to bring this up, right? Like I said, sensitivity to some loud sounds, sensitivity to some textures can be very neurotypical. But if it's starting to be that your child is very sensitive to various things, we'd want to know about that. Remember that when we make the diagnosis of autism, we are seeing characteristics in each of these 3 domains. But it still is important that if you are concerned of just one of the characteristics, that you do bring it up. Because again, it is our job to look at that big picture. We may want to monitor that every couple months. We may want you to get an evaluation. You may want an evaluation. But it's important to know these signs and what it actually means. So I'm putting these slides back up so you can see which of the characteristics I highlighted. I did not discuss every single characteristic. If you have any questions of clarification in regards to the other characteristics, please ask in the comment section below. And of course, I cannot make any personal diagnoses. So when looking at these characteristics, remember that no child, neurotypical or neuroatypical, is going to fit into a box or a mold. It's important to understand that and why it's important to know the different characteristics and how we look at different domains. One thing I always ask my families to look at is the point that we said that it can affect other activities of daily living. So these are not characteristics that are listed in any DSM-5 criteria or any diagnostic criteria, but I want you to look at the big picture of a child. Wow, they're really not taking to eating. It's really hard to console them for sleep, and they are having a lot of tantrums. It's important to look at the big picture here. These are all various domains of development, right? Being able to eat, textures, sleeping is a milestone, and behavior and tantrums is a milestone. So if I'm starting to find that a child is not sleeping well, not eating well, and also having more tantrums than I would expect of a toddler, I want to evaluate that child. I want to see, well, what is their development? Because many times parents think that I'm not setting enough boundaries. I need to do something different with sleep. I need to do something different with picky eating. I don't know how to handle my tantrums. But many times it's not how you're handling it. It's that the child may need certain services. So it's really important to remember this distinction. And if you are concerned, well, my child's not sleeping, eating, and I'm having a difficult time with tantrums, to bring it up to your child's clinician to see what are some ways to help you help them. A few take-homes: remember that the diagnosis of autism is not as always straightforward as you may think. You cannot fit a child into a box, so it is a spectrum and a variety of different characteristics that we're looking for. Sometimes from the time that you see characteristics in your child to the time of diagnosis can seem like a very long time. This can happen because of the process of getting services, monitoring different things, giving the child speech or OT or PT, and seeing maybe things are not improving and what else do we need to do. So I want you to remember that it's important to bring this up to your clinician because early intervention is best. Number 3, always bring up your concerns. Remember, we want to be pro-intervention. I want parents also to be pro-intervention, and pediatricians, speech therapists, OTs, we're pro-intervention. This means that if we have a concern about a child's development, that we get them evaluated so that we can get them the services they need. Why is this so important to me? It's called early intervention for a reason. Early intervention means we do it early. The earlier we do it, the better outcomes for a child. I see this in autistic children all the time. If we can get a child into early intervention services, the better outcomes that child can have, meaning before the age of 5. I'm attaching resources in my show notes about early intervention and how you can find early intervention programs in your state. The final take home: my goal is acceptance and not awareness. I actually feel really uncomfortable talking about awareness months, mainly because I feel like once that month is over, we forget, right? We put people on a pedestal for a month, but what about the rest of the year? So I want to use these months to spread awareness and acceptance. Awareness means, hey, this is great, it's going on, but I'm not going to really do anything about it. Acceptance is truly making changes in your life to learn more. For me, this has meant talking to more autistic adults. Through my desire to create content for autism awareness and acceptance, I learned more about this month and what it means to the autistic community. And I started talking to more autistic adults about what it means. So opening yourself up and educating yourself so that you can be more accepting of neurodiversity is the goal. Thank you for joining me today. Make sure you hit that thumbs up sign, subscribe to the Peds.Talk podcast, and make sure you listen to those episodes released on April 7, and subscribe to this channel so that you can stay up to date on all of my future videos. And I'll see you next week.